Welcome back. Let's start off by talking about functions. Remember what I said. Functions in JavaScript are also objects. And throughout the next couple of videos, we're going to explore that. But let's review what we have learned about functions so far. When we invoke a function, we get two parameters automatically. We get the this keyword and the arguments keyword. And we learned that arguments is an array-like object that has some weird behaviors for looping and iteration. So we want to avoid using it and instead use something like the spread operator. And we also learned that because of the arguments object, we can technically not have any parameters defined for a function. And when we call that function, if we add parameters to it, we can still grab them using the arguments keyword. We also learned that when we define our functions and the compiler looks at our code lexically, it determines what variables are available for us in our variable environment. And it also adds our scope chains. And we have a few ways of invoking and creating functions, right? The first method we're very familiar with. We have function 1. And this function 1 is going to, return 1. We've defined a function and we can invoke it like this. Nice and easy. So that was our first way of invoking a function. Another way of invoking a function is as a method. That is, a method is a function inside of an object. So if I do something like 2, and this function 2, returns 2, we can call this method of the object as object.to and run the function. I can also simplify this. Instead of saying function here with the new ECMAScript 6, we can just do that. So we're now calling the function as a method. And we also notice here that because the object is the one that's calling to, the this keyword will also be updated to object instead of window. So that's our second way. Another way that we've learned to use functions is using the call and apply, right? If I do return 3 here, I can call this function by doing 3.call and running this function. There you go. So those are 3 ways that we can define and invoke functions. But there's actually one more way. And this one you're not going to see very often. And it might look confusing to you at first. But just to show you, we can also do something like this. Const for equals to new function. And in here, we say, let's return 4. If I run this function and click run, look at that. I get 4. This is called a function constructor. Remember our built-in JavaScript objects that the JavaScript language itself comes with? Well, that's what it is. It creates functions for us. And this new keyword is something we're going to talk about in the object-oriented programming section of the course. But all we do is the first parameter is whatever we want the function text to be, which is to return 4. And I can also add parameters. So if I give it, let's say, parameter num, and I say return num, if I call number 4 with 4 here, I still get 4. It accepts parameters, and whatever's in the last parameter of the function will be the actual code body. But remember what I said before. Functions are objects. And it's something that is not very common in other languages. Because in JavaScript, I can do something like function, woohoo, that console.logs, woohoo, a very exciting function. But this function, I can also say woohoo.yell and add properties to it, like And underneath the hood, what JavaScript does is, well, it creates a special type of object called a callable object. That is, it's this special object. Let's just show you some pseudocode here. So it's not exactly what's happening underneath the hood, but for your illustration purposes. What we've done here is we have a yell property that is We also have a name property that comes with this function, which is the name of the function itself. So the name of the function is woohoo. And then it's also a callable object. That is, it can be invoked. Remember these brackets? Well, it's almost as if we can use this notation, and whenever we run the function, it's a callable function, we console.log woohoo. Now, if I actually ran this code, it wouldn't work. I just wanted to show you what is happening underneath the hood. To review, it looks something like this. If we had some function, well, it would be an object. Think of this orange box as an object with some special properties. One, it has a piece of code that we can invoke with these brackets. And when we invoke with these brackets, it reads whatever the piece of code is inside of that function and it executes it. Another thing it has a name property that is optional, because remember, we can have anonymous functions. So if this function was called SumFunc, the name will be SumFunc. But if we, let's say, used function expression, assigned it to a variable, but the function itself is anonymous, well, name wouldn't exist because it's optional. Another thing we get is we get properties automatically on a function. And we've seen them before. We have properties like call, apply, and bind that allow us to act upon that function. For example, if I go back to woohoo, I can do call, and we see that we have this method available for us. If I go back, we see that, look at this. This purple box, these are methods that we have. And then we also have properties like arguments, length, name, remember the name. So that if I run this, look at that, we have woohoo. Now, what about objects? If I created an object, would I have those properties on there? Well, let's see. Object dot. I don't have call, do I? I don't have bind. I don't have arguments. Nope, I don't have that. Remember what I said. Functions are objects, and they're a special type of object that is a callable object with the bracket notation for invoking the function, contains the code, it has name, and it also has some properties like call, apply, and bind. But why do we care? Why is that really important? You see, because functions are just objects in JavaScript, that means we can pass them around like objects, like things that contain data. So besides just doing things for us and performing actions in our code, we can also store them as data, move them around, and have some really interesting applications. And that's what we're going to explore over the next couple of videos. Let's dive in.